Hello and welcome to Knowledge is Power. My name is Ayana Sloan and I'm here with my dynamic co-host, Gail King Gibson. How are you today, Gail?
Good morning.
Well, we have some exciting news for you today. We want to talk about something that actually can affect you as an individual, something that could affect your family, your community, and even things that actually affect our country. Before we get started on our subject today, which I believe is going to be very interesting for you, I just want to briefly say, if you've never seen Knowledge is Power, Gail and I are both attorneys, and we both have practiced for many years. But we've had recently some passionate, mostly on Gail's part, and interesting discussions just about how important it is to get information out to the community. So many times people are faced with making decisions or they find themselves in circumstances and they just don't have enough information to know how you best protect yourself, your resources, your family, etc. And so we decided to do a program that would give you information that hopefully will empower you, so that hopefully when you're in a situation like that, we don't want anybody to find themselves in some of these situations, you have a better chance of knowing what to do. To assist us with that today, we have the lovely Dorianne Mason, who is an attorney with the Ohio Justice and Policy Center. How are you today, Dorianne?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Thank you
I'm
for
doing
joining
well.
us.
Good, thank you.
And so y'all know we're going to have an interesting discussion today because we have three powerful attorneys sitting here at the table. But we promise to make this interesting, and we'll try not to be too passionate.
Oh, you can never be too passionate. That's not a thing.
Because we want to make sure you get the information that you need. Before we get started on our topic, I would like to give Dorianne the chance to tell you a little bit about who she is, as well as to introduce you to the Ohio Justice and Policy Center, which is a phenomenal organization. Dorianne.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So, Dorianne Mason. I am a staff attorney at the Ohio Justice and Policy Center. We are a public interest law firm, and we help people who have had touches with the criminal justice system. So that's people who are currently incarcerated, and also people who are returning citizens or people who have been convicted of misdemeanors and felonies. And we essentially want to make it as easy as possible for people to re-enter society, and that's essentially the work that we do.
Okay, I like that. That was brief. Yes. That's very brief. I said, rarely are attorneys brief. I appreciate that. But there's something specific that we want Dorianne to talk about today, and that is going to be the subject that the three of us actually have been discussing, and that is there's so many ramifications or consequences to dealing with the criminal justice system that goes way beyond what most of us even know about. There are financial implications that are involved, and even Gail and I, who are both attorneys and have practiced for over 20 years, we're having a discussion about something the other day, and I happened to mention something about collateral sanctions, and Gail, who's a phenomenal lawyer, says, what is that?
What are collateral sanctions? Because I'd never heard of the term.
Right. And if we haven't heard of it, then we're sure that the average individual hasn't heard of that as well. And what we'd like to do is to talk about, maybe 2 or 3 different components of the financial implications that people have to deal with sometimes on a daily basis once you become involved with the criminal justice system. One of those being collateral sanctions, but also just the cost of defending yourself, or if you're accused of a crime, not convicted, but accused of a crime, then what's the cost that's associated with that, as well as the cost associated with being actually incarcerated, or as Gail found out, being in the local, the justice system or whatever. There's so many hidden costs, and they're being borne by people who are not able to bear these costs. So it's affecting families, individuals, and communities. There's a lot there. I know I said a lot, but I do want to give Dorianne a chance to start the conversation, and then we're going to jump in with some things. Okay?
Yeah, that sounds good. So the way that I like to think about the costs that are associated with criminal convictions and sort of the ramifications are essentially you have your first sentence and then you have a second sentence. So the first sentence is once you have been accused of a crime and you've been arrested. If you choose to either plea out to the crime, or if you even choose to fight it and are eventually acquitted, or the case would be potentially dismissed, there are still costs that are associated with it. So outside of the cost of actual legal representation, you have fines and fees that are associated with the disposition of your case. So if you
legal representation is never cheap. I'm sorry, I'd like to say that. I'm sorry, never cheap. Go ahead, Dorian.
So even outside of that cost, you still have the cost of the actual disposition. So if you have something as minor as an open flask, so you were out in a park and were caught with a bottle of alcohol and you're not supposed to be out drinking in the park, then you have to pay the fine that's associated with that conviction, and you also have to pay potentially court cost. And so that one infraction may cost you $250. And for, right.
Yeah, I was going to bring up, and the fact that if your loved one is incarcerated, awaiting trial, in order to visit that individual, typically there is a fee associated with going to actually see them.
Right.
In certain jurisdictions. I'm not sure if that fee applies in all. Do we have that here?
In Hamilton County, I am not aware of a fee to actually do visits, but there are definitely fees associated with people being confined, even in the Justice Center, as well as if you want to provide them any of the basic necessities or like
By that
food.
we mean toothpaste,
Towel.
underwear.
Right. All those things cost.
Yeah.
Sometimes people say, well, they're in prison. Life is not supposed to be easy. No, we're not talking about that.
Right.
We're talking about the basic toiletries.
Right. Yeah, there are definitely costs that are associated with incarceration, and I don't think many people realize that, and not costs like, oh, I want a particular thing in the commissary, but just basic items cost families and individuals.
Right, and I guess the disconnect for me is that in most cases you have an individual who has committed a crime due to some necessity that they have. They have a need. Either they need to pay a bill or they can't feed their family. And so obviously they have no money. And then we're going to put them into a system where it's going to actually cost them more money to be as part of that system. I'm not sure most people are really aware of that. And then once you advance, whether you're convicted or you're found not guilty, if you're convicted of a crime, you serve your time and you get out. We're talking now about collateral sanctions, the implication or what you're forced to endure as a result of serving your time. And we're looking at your inability to qualify for certain jobs because of your criminal record.
Exactly.
And Gail is moving us way ahead.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
She wants to get to that discussion.
Let me explain why I'm so, I guess, passionate about this issue is if you follow the news and you're aware of the Wells Fargo situation where you had a national bank commit widespread fraud where they opened over 1 million accounts. At this point, no one has gone to jail. There is a criminal investigation, I believe, that's been commenced in California. But if this had happened at a local level, if you had an employee at a bank who was randomly opening accounts and using Social Security numbers, that individual would go to jail. And so when you're doing it at this level of a fraud, it appears to the average person that I'm okay if I commit fraud on a large scale as opposed to some type of petty crime, because these individuals don't get charged, they don't go to jail. And so that's what's really tugging at my heartstrings when we talk about these penalties that are imposed on individuals who are forced to go through the criminal justice system and not be rehabilitated, which is the end goal of the criminal justice system.
And Gail's exactly right, and we do want to bring all that into the conversation as I keep giving Dorian a chance to introduce some things. With that, I want to say just quickly, what happens is that, for instance, particularly there's a difference in how you treat white-collar criminals and how we treat all of the criminals, which I'm not really sure what name we give them, and the ability to be able to post bond and get out of jail. For instance, if you have a lot of money and you're charged with a crime, more than likely you're going to be able to post bond, and you are not even in jail. So you're not in like we talk about people in the Hamilton County justice system, they're not dealing with that. The lawyer will be there, they'll get out of jail like within a couple of hours, so that some of the things they will never have to encounter. But many people, which happens too often, the powerless, unfortunately many minorities, ethnicities, etc., that's where the law has a greater impact on certain communities because they don't have an attorney. They can't afford an attorney. Often, sometimes they're stuck with public defenders. There are many excellent public defenders out there, so I don't want to say anything disparaging. But sometimes, if you have no other choice and you have a public defender, it makes a difference in the outcome of your case, whether you can hire a private attorney or not. Sometimes it does make a difference. So we get into all that cost as well. But I want to come back to Dorianne.
Sorry, Dorianne.
Oh, no,
Gail
no,
jumped
you're
us way ahead.
fine.
All that is part of the same
Exactly.
conversation. But we're going to let her add a little bit more about
the costs on the front end. Yeah. So it's all a continuum, right? So the people are being impacted at the front end. They're being impacted while they're incarcerated.
That's right.
And then they're impacted once they get out.
Right.
So it's a
We agree.
continuum. And we're actually collecting some data around that specific information. So how much people are paying into the court system in order to have their cases be resolved. We did a study and collected some information from the clients that we have at the Ohio Justice and Policy Center. And what we found is that on average, the folks that we're working with make about $12,000 a year. So that's on average about $1,000 a month. And these are people who are supporting families of 3 children, 4 children sometimes. And they have paid out on average $1,000 to the court system. So $1,000 to me is significant.
Right.
As like a working professional, $1,000 is significant. So we're talking about a community that is well below the federal poverty line. $1,000 in order to have cases be disposed of. So that's either through plea negotiations, through fines, fees, et cetera. That is a significant amount of money that they're dealing with.
That's like 1 month's income.
Right, yeah, that is a full month's income to them.
Which means, you're going to get behind on your bills.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Well, it's the one check away from homelessness
Right.
concept.
That's all
Right,
of that.
and don't not be able to pay for bail. So when we're talking about the consequence of that and economic consequences,
That's right.
if you are living in an apartment
That's
and
right.
you are kept away from your apartment, kept
That's
away
right.
from your home, kept away from your part-time job, you lose that job and you potentially lose that job. I mean, lose that housing.
That's exactly right.
And so we're having people have really devastating consequences for many times lower level misdemeanors. So these are not offenses of violence. These are not higher level people who are having criminal, conduct. These are lower level folks who are having devastating consequences. So, and they extend once you've paid your price, you've paid your money, you've done your time.
Right.
You come out, you want a better opportunity, and then you hit another wall. And that's sort of the second sentence, which I can talk about now, or we can chat about.
We're going to get to the second sentence.
Okay.
Because I want to talk a little bit
yeah.
about, if you don't mind, without giving out any names or anything that would identify anybody.
Sure.
Talk about this experience you had with recently with some of the costs.
Right. So I have a friend, and her daughter was incarcerated in the state of Georgia, and she wanted to visit her daughter and was told that she had to pay a fee. It was $7 for her to go and actually visit her. In addition to all of the other costs, the young lady was not allowed to bring a book or anything else with her, toothbrush or anything else. Everything had to be purchased through the prison system. And I understand that there's obviously a need for the safety of police professionals in that environment, but again, this seems an additional burden on someone who already can't afford to be part of the system. And we're not advocating for criminals to have unfettered rights, but I just think it makes better sense to say if you're going to lock someone up, that's fine, and there's a cost for doing that, and that person serves that time, but there shouldn't be like a la carte menu when you go to prison. Well, I need X, Y, and Z, and therefore it's $4 for a pair of underwear or $5 for a toothbrush or whatever the cost is. That just seems an additional burden on someone who's already facing a number of issues, and if our goal really is to allow this individual to serve their time, rehabilitate them so that they can come out and be a productive member of society, this isn't the way to go.
Well, and with that, I'm just going to add briefly because we're going to talk about, we're kind of telling you it's a very complex process, and one of the things that you discover is so many people will often say, well, you did the crime, do the time. You're not necessarily convicted yet. This could be cost that you're paying even before you've had your trial.
Right.
So it's not just that do the crime, do the time, whatever. It's that even if you're in jail and you have not been convicted, if you cannot post your bond, you will be sitting there.
Absolutely.
And you could lose your job. As
Your
she
home.
mentioned, Dorianne mentioned, it has consequences. You could lose your, your apartment where you live. Then all of a sudden your family's suffering. We're talking about what they use the economists call negative externalities that go along with so-called being charged with a crime in our country. They are, to me, out of control to the extent that many times private companies are benefiting from the incarceration of citizens. And yes, I know that's all capitalism and all that kind of stuff. But I have a problem with the fact that you have locked someone up, you've taken their liberty away, and then particularly if they are assigned to some kind of penal institution or whatever, people serve long sentences sometimes. And if they don't have that family support, that means they don't have access to resources that would allow them to meet their most basic needs. As Gail mentioned a little bit, and I just want to add on to that, you have to buy everything. You are literally locked up. Let's say if you were locked up 20 years, and you don't have someone on the outside who for 20 years
supports you,
can provide you with basic necessities. That means your toothpaste, your ability to buy soap, deodorant, you know, your personal undergarments, your shoes, everything that you need to survive for 20 years has to be furnished by someone. And most of the time, unfortunately, because people who disproportionately are often locked up and serving long sentences come from minority communities where they can't afford often to bear the cost of supporting someone for long, term sentences. But it's a reality that many families deal with every day. Do you agree?
Yeah, I definitely think that that's a national problem, and it does vary by jurisdiction, but when we're talking about criminal justice reform, that's a significant part of the reform, is allowing people to be able to enter, transition through the justice system, and not come out with debt. And not just debt for themselves, but debt for their entire families. We do not want people to come out bankrupt, bankrupted, and their families to be impoverished even further.
Because I would assume that the numbers show if you're in debt when you leave prison or you're unable to gain employment, that the likelihood of you re-entering the justice system is pretty high.
Absolutely. So recidivism rates are tied to economic stability, familial stability. So when we're talking about people who are currently incarcerated, they need to be able to see their family. Their family needs to be able to visit them, because that ensures that while they're incarcerated, they are not becoming more hardened, that they are not further disconnecting from society and their lives that they had outside of outside of prison or outside of jail. And so when we're talking about the safety of our communities, the safety of our nation, we have to ensure that they are connecting, that people who have been convicted of crimes, and that's another thing. So we definitely say criminals, I think people use that word, but really they're just people who have been convicted of crimes, because there are a lot of people out here who have never been caught.
I agree.
People who haven't been caught. So these are just human beings, and they're human beings that I, get the pleasure and the honor of working with every day, but they are just people who have been caught doing something, right? And like you said, a lot of times doing things that they felt like they had to in order to be able to support themselves and their family. And I'll just do a quick two, because I know we're in a really short time, but I had a client who came in who was crying. I was trying to help her get through the CQE process, and she had a theft conviction from Walmart, from a theft conviction from a larger store. And the things that she stole were baby clothes and baby food, right? Wow. So that's not to say that people don't, deserve to have consequences to their actions, but this was, 7 or 8 years ago, and she was still facing really significant barriers because of a decision that she made when she had a very young child at home. So it's like, I really want to make sure that people understand the folks that we're talking about are not hardened criminals. So, and even hardened criminals deserve an opportunity for, rehabilitation and to enter society.
All right. Is that a segue into our discussion on the certificates that are now available?
It is exactly a wonderful segue into that. And I think just, if you don't mind, I just want to say this very quickly, is that one of the things that I think we have to do is exactly what you're saying, is how we see the people who have maybe made a mistake. I don't even want to say committed a crime, because there are people in our country who have committed atrocities. I can't even find the word for it. Thank you. And often aren't even prosecuted for those things that they have done, and they've impacted the lives of many, many people. So I'm saying people have made a mistake. We're not being soft on crime. We're not saying any of that. But we have to get realistic about how we look at mistakes in our country, because we've just become so, I think, so desensitized that we don't even see them as human beings almost anymore.
Just lock them
it's
up.
just lock them up and
Exactly.
throw them away.
Exactly.
And what kind of country will we be if we continue with that kind of attitude toward people who make a mistake? So with that, yes, it is a wonderful segue into what we also would like to talk about today. And I know I can see Gail's hands up here. She's itching
Ready
to
for
this
it.
conversation, which is we're going to talk about something called collateral sanctions. We're going to let Dorian introduce that idea, and then we're going to let Gail jump all over it. Okay, Dorian.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about people in sort of the first sentence that they have, so the disposition of their case where they have to pay money or they spend time in jail or prison. But there's a second sentence essentially that they have to serve, and it's a lifetime sentence. So every time that you have a criminal conviction, there are laws and regulations that are associated with it that follow you no matter how long it's been, what you have done to, improve your life and your circumstance and, the lives of your family members. It does not matter. It still stays with you. And those are things that now there's an opportunity to assuage by getting this certificate. It's called a Certificate of Qualification for Employment. It's something that our state chose to do in 2012. We enacted legislation that allows for some of those barriers that people experience because of their criminal convictions to change from being mandatory barriers, meaning no one has any discretion. You have to bar that person from that job or from that license or from that opportunity. We are now changing that from mandatory to discretionary. So an employer or a licensing board can say yes to that person. It opens a door to a yes. It's not a mandatory yes, so the person doesn't have to give you a job, doesn't have to give you that license, but it does allow the person to be able to if they so choose.
And the interesting thing is that we, as I understand it, there are roughly 1.9 million convicted felons and individuals who have been convicted of misdemeanors in the state of Ohio that would be eligible for this program. But in terms of the application process, can we talk a little bit about that and how, if you are a convicted felon, you would go through the process of applying for this certificate that you could then take to a prospective employer?
Absolutely. So people who have been convicted of felonies or misdemeanors, there is a waiting period. So it's 1 year if you were convicted of a felony. You have to, once you've paid everything and you're off probation, off of any community control for a year.
I'm sorry, I need to say that. Paid all the fines.
Right, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Once again,
right,
yeah,
which is a significant barrier sometimes to
especially
people.
If you can't get a job.
You can't get a job, then and you need this certificate in order to get a job, but then you can't get it because you haven't paid the fines and fees. So it's 1 year after the complete disposition of your case, including money. And for misdemeanors, it is 6 months after the complete disposition of your case. So once that waiting period has completed, then you fill out an application, and it asks for a lot of information.
Yes, it does.
History would be part of it.
Exactly. So it asks for your criminal history, it asks for your employment history, it asks for references. So references being at least one family member who can speak on your behalf and at least one non-family member who can speak on your behalf. And then you have to answer a series of questions, right? So why should this certificate be granted? So you have to talk about the reasons why you need it in your life, why granting the certificate would not pose an unreasonable risk to the safety of any individual or the safety of the public. You have to talk about why getting this certificate would allow you to lead a law-abiding life, and also talk about how the certificate will materially assist you in essentially getting gainful employment. So, or getting a license if you particularly need it. So you have to, it is not an easy process, right? It is not an easy process. But what that means is that once someone has gone through the process and been granted the certificate, that it really does mean something, because this person did not just fill out one sheet, and give it to someone and then they were approved.
Right.
So it's a pretty arduous process, and once they have completed all those components, it goes to a judge. And the judge can choose to hold a hearing. So a hearing would just mean that the person would come in front of the judge, answer questions relating to the material that they provided in the application, and then the judge says yes or no. And then, we can talk about what that means when the judge says yes.
Okay, and we're gonna, because I know Gil's jumping, I just want to say one thing, and we're gonna get to hers, and that is these are not necessarily people who have been convicted, which we've said before. We just need to emphasize it, of any kind of violent crime. We have 5 minutes. Oh wow! I'm sorry.
Wow!
So with that, I'm gonna let Gil jump in and say her.
No, so what's interesting though is the data shows that we've had this law since 2012, and we've had roughly 500 successful applications, and I think there are 2,000 applications in the pipeline. It seems fairly small considering the number of individuals that would be eligible for the program. Do you think that's attributable to the one issue you raised, the fines, the fact that you've got to be fully compliant before you're eligible to file the actual application, or do you think it's the fact that most people don't know about it?
I think it's most people don't know about it.
Okay.
So I think that the first hurdle is making sure that people are aware that this is something that's out there. And then once we get over that hurdle, we'll tackle the fines.
Okay.
And that's essentially what we do for our clients, is that we just want to make sure that the information is out there, that they know about it. And then once they come to us, if they have outstanding fines or fees, then we work towards getting those either mitigated through reduction. I don't know how. Yeah, so it just depends on the judge. But reduction is possible, and then community service in lieu of fines is also possible. So we take some steps to make sure that that's done, but I think it's mostly awareness. People don't know that this is out there.
So this is a real opportunity for folks who have a criminal record and who want gainful employment but have not been able to obtain that, to use this as an avenue to get that.
Absolutely.
And I'm so sorry, we run out of time. What we do need to say as we wrap up is that we're going to provide information for the Highest Justice and Policy Center at the end of the program. And also this, we're talking about people who are being barred from working for certain professions and obtaining certain kind of licenses. We're talking about to be a cosmetologist, to some
nurse,
healthcare professions, etc., that would give them a living wage. And many people have gone and trained for these jobs and still can't work in them because they need to because they have a conviction.
Yes.
So they're barred from, really earning a living wage. And I'm so sorry, this has been such a wonderful program. Y'all know you get 3 lawyers together and we can talk forever. This has been exciting. Again, thank you so much, Dorianne, from the Ohio Justice and Policy Center here in Ohio. And my lovely co-host, Gail King Gibson.
Thank you,
and we promise we will come back with a part 2. Will you come back?
Absolutely, yeah.
Because there's so much more information that we can offer about this, and we really want you to be empowered and understand that you can change things. But you have to know, you have to have enough information to know what you're dealing with and how to deal with it.
Exactly.
Thank you, everybody, for watching Knowledge is Power, and hope we all have a wonderful day.
Does he give us some kind of